Hi there, it's me, Ita Bay. So I posted yesterday a video on my YouTube um, about how I've left the trauma field. And one of the things I shared in that video is that what that means for me is that I'm having an experience of residing more fully in um, what I'm calling the generative field. And 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 instead of, so when I'm rooting in the generative field, stabilize in the generative field, and processing these activations as they come up, and that's different from how it has been for me in the past, where I had lived, my ordinary life was in the trauma field, and I would have these moments, these glimpses of the generative field of greater sense of presence and aliveness and contact with the flow of life. So it's flipped now, and I'm really feeling myself in contact with the flow of life. And one of the ways that shows up is a lot of magic that happens, things that I couldn't have planned. Um, but I wanted to share something because last night I did some processing of this trauma, and I wanted to share about what exactly that looks like. So I was up in the middle of the night, as I am. I often am when I'm moving these kinds of energies. And the inquiry I was in was this really judgmental voice that I was noticing coming on, and I wanted to understand what is this judgmental voice. And so I did. There's a bunch of practices that I use. This one was very simple. I decided just to actually talk to the voice, and I stood up, and I would actually I stood as myself, and then I stood as the voice. So when I stood as myself, I said, I want to know you, and so then when I switched places and I stood as the voice, and as the judgmental voice, and I could feel the kind of energetic shift in my body. It felt very kind of rigid and a kind of imposing quality, like an authority figure almost. And it said, you know me, you know who I am. And actually, when it said that, it did call to mind specific things that I know about my family and ancestral trauma. And so as I talked to it, one of the things I said is, what do you want? What do you want? And it said it wanted to be happy. And I thought to myself, well, I know how to be happy. So I stood and I just allowed myself, I just filled myself with happiness. And I had this really subtle awareness show up while I was in this state of feeling happiness, which is, the best way I can describe it is if you imagine yourself in a kind of field of light, and it is the field of joy, of love. And across the boundary of that field, I experienced my hand going out, wanting connection. And what happened was I experienced a hand coming in and kind of like pulling me, wanting to pull me out of that field of love. And what I understood, and this again partly because I know about the trauma in my family system, what I understood was that this voice is a voice that came online during during a very specific trauma in which there was a violation, a boundary violation, a terrible boundary violation. I want to speak a little bit more into this space because I know from my work with clients that this is a boundary violation that many people have in their personal or family system. And it is when you are open in your innocence and in your desire and in your love and in your longing. You meet a person, and that person intentionally knows that they're going to take advantage of you, that they're going to violate you. They're going to violate your innocent heart. This happens, for example, if a person is groomed and trafficked. It happens if a person is in cases of rape and other forms of sexual violence, when there is a kind of intentional knowing on behalf of the perpetrator. And it is a rupture, a boundary rupture that can impact for generations, because it is so painful. And it's especially painful because the person's heart is so vulnerable, so open to love. And in fact, that's what they're looking for when they meet this person who's actually, who's the perpetrator, when you meet the perpetrator. So I'm naming that. I'm just going to take that, just to take a moment with that, just for the ways in which it's alive in so many of our personal and family systems and in our collective. Now, there's a lot more I could say about this. I kind of want to narrow it down specifically to how I process this inside of me, but I do want to say that one of the places to start to distinguish here is that the trauma comes because the reaction to the trauma is a self-shaming. In other words, we feel that we did something wrong by allowing ourselves to be harmed, violated by this other person. And yet the truth is that person intentionally, that was a violation, that they knew that they were going to take something from you. And so the responsibility lies with that other person. They are responsible for the harm that they created. You are not responsible for that harm. But our psyche kind of puts together a construction that says, I will never let this happen again. And the way I will never let this happen again is by kind of policing. In this case, it was policing my happiness. That's what I felt. That this part of me, which is a part of inherited through an ancestral trauma, a family trauma, it operated because it wanted to keep me safe, naturally. But it functioned to police my happiness in a way that actually would kind of say, are you sure about that person? Are you sure about this happiness? Are you sure about this moment? And it had me looking inside of them, rather than being present to the moment, it had me kind of looking for all the possible signs that this moment could be a moment of that violation. And so even though it wanted happiness, it really couldn't surrender into happiness. So the way I worked with this part of myself was two things. The first is that I spoke to it. I sat down on the couch and I just talked to this part of myself and wanted to get into what it was feeling. Because part of what I understand is that when it's so alive like this in me, when it's kind of stuck in my body, it's an energy that's stuck in my body, that part of the way in which I support it to be liberated and alchemized is that I convert the energy stuck into energy in motion, which of course is emotion. So that meant that I needed to try to tap into the emotion behind this policing quality inside of me, the part of me that was policing my own happiness. And at first I said, is it sadness? Nothing. I didn't have an emotional response to it. But when I asked about anger, that's when I started to get, I started to cry. I started to feel anger moving in my body. I got up and I allowed myself to sort of shake and let the anger show, kind of move even just a little bit. You don't have to have a full cathartic moment, although you might. But even if you can begin to express that emotional energy in some way, just getting it moving through your body, allowing it to be seen and expressed with tears, with breath, with shaking, with anger, with raging, however it wants to express. And then, so that was the first thing I did. And then the other thing I did was I then said, and this is, this is something, I think this is really part of how I've come to work, which is to make contact with the Divine Mother. And, one of the things I know for myself, my name is Aitabe, which means the spirit of the mother, the spirit of the Divine Mother. And that name came to me not because I had necessarily a very conscious relationship with with the Divine Mother. I think I've been cultivating it, but there is a kind of naturalness for me to connecting with this part beyond me, this part of us, all of us. And so one of the things I've been doing recently is letting myself rest in the arms of the Divine Mother, so that, and I don't have to do anything, right? Love itself, her divine love, is what creates the healing movement. So I show up, I do this inquiry practice. I allow myself to invite the emotions to be seen and to start to move. And then after that, I give it to God. I give it to the Divine Mother. And I went to sleep with the intention to just let my body and my soul rest in the arms of the Divine Mother. And I had these wonderful dreams. I had these powerful dreams, these portal crossing dreams of climbing this big tree and kind of getting out more and more on a limb and feeling all this fear showing up, and getting to a point where I crossed over onto this, I was crossing into this building with a balcony, and I had to keep moving through my fear in order to pass into this little window, this little kind of crawl space I had to move through to get into this new field, this new building. And I did it twice. I noticed I had two dreams very similar where I had to actually kind of move my body through. It felt a bit like shedding a skin. And I was so grateful because I really could feel that, oh yeah, something significant has moved in me with the time that I spent, both intentionally wanting to see this part of me and letting it be held. And I took the dream as a sign that this was something had moved. So I'm sharing that because maybe that's useful to you. I hope it is. I'm also sharing it because I am starting a 3-month expansive. I didn't want to call it intensive, though it will be pretty intense. So I'm starting a 3-month expansive called the Authentic Heart Expansive, where you will work with me and a cohort of others who are really on their path to free themselves from living out of the patterns of the trauma field and stepping fully into the generative field, and learning a set of practices and being held by community and then receiving specific guidance and support from me. So if that's interesting to you, I'm enrolling right now. So you should reach out to me. You can email me. That's probably the best way. hello@greenriverfc.com. I'll put that information someplace in the, notes someplace. But if you're interested, reach out to me. I'd love to work with you if this feels like the work that you're here to do right now. Okay, take care.